This is the news, and you're on Breakthrough. I'm Eugene Puryear.
And I'm Monica Cruz. We're here tonight joining you as we do every week, Wednesday at 8 p.m., bringing you some of the most pressing news and stories of struggle you won't hear anywhere else.
That is right, and we want you to take the time right now to hit that share button so that everyone who is following you can follow us. We've got a great lineup of things for you here tonight. Of course, we'll be talking about the spike in coronavirus cases here in the United States, the ongoing uprising against racism and oppression that is continuing to sweep this nation. Essential workers in the state of North Carolina speaking out about some of the challenges they face in demanding a say in health and safety matters as this reopening continues. The imminent, or at least potentially imminent, annexation of the West Bank in Palestine and the continued struggle against Israeli apartheid, as well as the Supreme Court, what some of the recent decisions may mean, certainly for the elections in the fall, but how we view the court and the struggle intersecting in general. So a lot of great things here for you today on the show. So just take a second, hit that share button, and first, we're going to go back to Monica with some headlines.
The Trump administration has purchased virtually all stocks of remdesivir, one of the only two drugs proven to help treat COVID-19 patients. The Trump administration has shown that it will outbid every other nation to secure any medicine used against the virus, and the government now controls remdesivir supplies for the next 3 months, leaving other nations still struggling to defeat the virus with limited access to the life-saving drug. The drug is developed by Gilead with U.S. taxpayer support and will cost the government over $2,300 per dosage for patients on the 5-day treatment and around $3,100 for patients through commercial insurance. It also raises serious questions about how the U.S. government will maneuver if a vaccine is developed. New York City, which is facing a $9 billion shortfall, has agreed to major budget cuts, but not where people were demanding. Hundreds of protesters in New York City have occupied City Hall for almost a week straight to demand that the City Council defund the NYPD. The police department has an official operating budget of $6 billion, larger than the military budget of most small nations. The budget reduces the NYPD funding by $1 billion, but just by moving that money around. For instance, moving school police into the Department of Education budget. Other cuts to municipal services and across-the-board hiring freezes will have a devastating impact on working class and poor communities. By popular referendum in a very narrow vote, Oklahoma became the first and only state so far to expand government-backed health insurance during the pandemic. The ballot measure to extend Medicaid to an estimated 200,000 poor adults passed with a 50% of the vote over the objections of the governor and Republican leaders in the state and nationwide. The Trump administration has a plan to allow states to cap Medicaid spending, which it has refused to back off even amid the pandemic. The average number of new coronavirus cases in Oklahoma has more than doubled in the past month, and the state reported a record 585 new infections on Tuesday. The statue of King Leopold II was taken off public display in Belgium this week to mark the 60th anniversary of the end of Belgium's colonial rule in Congo. Leopold II ruled Belgium from 1865 to 1909 and was responsible for at least 10 million Congolese deaths and the forced labor of millions of more for the ivory trade and the extraction of rubber and other natural resources. The current Belgian king, Philippe, Leopold II's great-great-great-nephew, issued a statement of his quote-unquote deepest regret, but notably stopped short of a full apology because doing so would reopen the country to reparations claims. Philippe also failed to mention that he is a great personal beneficiary of the wealth stolen through this genocide by his family members. As states across the country rush to reopen in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, a reminder, we are still in the first wave of this pandemic. We are now seeing the same states rush to close down and implement measures such as closing down parks, beaches, and other public places, restaurants and bars. All of that as we are seeing infection rates skyrocket in these exact same states that, again, rush to reopen. Let's go to some coverage coverage of this current resurgence of the virus across the states.
Let's start with the coronavirus. At least 16 states have now paused or reversed their plans to reopen. The latest is Arizona, where bars, gyms, and movie theaters are being closed for 30 days.
Meanwhile, Los Angeles is joining South Florida, closing county beaches over the 4th of July weekend.
The hospitality industry taking a second hit as Florida sees a record number of COVID-19 cases.
Picnic tables at parks around the Austin area will sit empty as local leaders like Travis County Judge Sam Bisco try to help prevent the spread of COVID-19.
Just last week, the Panhandle Health District expected North Idaho to see over 200 coronavirus cases by the 4th of July. But now with 285 total cases, the area is more on track to hit over 300 cases.
Well, yeah, I mean, really unbelievable on so many different levels to see I think what was obvious from the beginning, that sort of cavalierly reopening could lead to exactly this sort of problem. And certainly the level of just, complete and total public health just ignorance, if that's even a word, by so many of these governors that won't mandate masks. I mean, even the most basic things, beyond keeping things closed or whatever it may be, even the most basic things like mandating masks, many of these states were refusing to do, were sort of embracing a movement against. Really, in every single way, this was predictable. But the issue is, you have to make money. This is capitalism, money over people's lives at every single turn. And I think we're seeing that here again.
That's exactly right. Seeing this all go down is beyond infuriating. And these governors should be issuing apologies. They should be publicly shamed for these actions, putting millions of Americans' lives at risk. And again, as you said, Eugene, this was all stuff that we saw coming, that we were talking about weeks ago when we discussed the reopening. Watch that hilarious clip of the mayor of Las Vegas and Anderson Cooper going back at it. We saw the absolute audacity and just the carelessness of these governors falling in line with the lead from the Trump administration to rush into a reopening. And just a reminder, it's not only Republican governors in these states where we saw these armed right-wing protests against social distancing, against wearing the mask, against for the reopening of the economy, of course. But even in states with more liberal politicians, with Democrats at the head in the governor's office, we are still seeing this same issue, and people in the streets right now demanding justice against racist police brutality. I want to see people in the streets as well calling out the government for their disgusting mishandling of this pandemic and the way that now we are seeing it continue to rage on in ways that were completely predictable, completely avoidable. And again, it just goes to show who this nation's priorities, or what this nation's priorities really are. And that, of course, is profit over human lives.
Yeah, I think it's, people should note that this is not something that's going away anytime soon, and certainly even more so because of the actions that we've seen. A fish rots from the head down. I think we've certainly seen the Trump administration has done absolutely nothing to prepare for what obviously is already the first wave, but even a potential of an even more devastating second wave when we get to the next cold and flu season. But, there's no coordination of production of PPE, of crucial medical equipment. There's no real significant effort to bring in any sort of contact tracing. Some states have done some, but it's not linked in together, to have more medical health professionals. Really anything that you would think you would need to do to have a mobilization to protect public health, whether we're talking about the federal level, whether we're really talking about the state level, although since some governors have done, better as compared to Trump. That's a bar so low, I don't even know if it's possible not to clear it. But nevertheless, some of them looking good in a relative sense, but really from top to bottom, there has not been the level of preparation. And let's remember from the very beginning, many of these officials, everyone talking about Andrew Cuomo as the great governor in America, New York is doing so well. He was one of the main people downplaying it in the early parts of the pandemic. And all of these people of both parties from day one have been complicit in why this disease has spread so rapidly and so devastatingly, and why it will continue to. And ultimately, it really is now coming down to a question of whether or not people are going to force the government to take more significant action, because there's just no doubt that this country is not only completely unprepared, but has almost essentially just decided to throw hundreds of thousands of people to the wolves.
That's exactly right. And it's really, again, astounding, this issue of rent still being due, bills still being due. We reported in our headlines last week the price of water, one of the most basic necessities, if not the most basic necessities for human life, life overall, is becoming completely unaffordable for millions of Americans, right? And as we're seeing millions more Americans every single week, these unemployment claim numbers on the federal level, I mean, just skyrocketing. And 40 plus million people out of work since the start of the pandemic, yet there is no nationwide pause on rent and bills, and we are projected to see a incredible wave of evictions, right? And I mean, really every single other developed nation in Europe, across Latin America, across Asia, you name it, they were able to put a pause on rents and bills during the course of the pandemic to make sure that people were not losing their homes or losing their health care through their jobs when they lose their jobs. All of this to make sure that people are still receiving some sort of livable wage or supplement. This $1,200 stimulus check that millions of Americans were left out of. Let's talk about that. That still wasn't enough. Even those families that did receive the $1,200, it's not enough. So it's really going to be something we have to wait and see. And again, bringing it back to this incredible movement we're seeing not only across the country but around the world, seeing how it can widen its demands, because as this pandemic rages on and gets worse, the economy is continuing to crash. We're seeing an economic crisis of unprecedented proportions well on its way. So it's very clear that people need to be demanding everything under the sun, not just an end to racist policing and not just an end to pause on rents, but really addressing some of the very fundamental issues of healthcare, of education, of housing, and making sure all of these things are available to everyone.
Indeed. Last week, workers in North Carolina, organized by Raise Up 15 and other labor organizations, spoke out at a town hall detailing many of the challenges they are facing as the reopening continues, working in essential frontline industries and demanding a voice in health and safety matters in the state of North Carolina as the state continues to reopen in the context of the pandemic. Here is a little bit of what they had to say.
We have the screens in front of the register, and customers were trying to look under the screen, trying to talk to you, hand you money and stuff. We didn't have any gloves, and I'm just like, okay, no, this is not gonna work.
At that time, we didn't have no masks. We just had gloves. We didn't have no shields. We got drive-throughs, and we didn't have nothing over anything. We didn't even have no shields inside. Okay, they sent me to another McDonald's, which is in a Walmart. It's few of us working there. When I got there, it was only one shield. Again, they had masses, but still, we're in Walmart. There's thousands of people coming in Walmart every day, and they close off one side of Walmart, so the Walmart, the side that they come in, is the side that McDonald's is in. So that's thousands of people coming through every day. So I went and did another interview on a radio station. Talked about that. Unfortunately, in a couple more days, hey, here come another shield at McDonald's. But that's not my thing. I mean, I shouldn't have to, and we shouldn't have to go out and ask for this stuff. That should be there. They already know what's going on in McDonald's and everything. So I don't think that we should have to be accountable to go out and get help for ourselves. This is y'all company. Y'all making $1 million a day. Y'all should have been had the shields up.
It's only been since the impact of COVID-19 that we are even considered essential, honestly. Now, all of a sudden, we're essential. I don't think that they associated us with being essential. I don't think that people realize just the dangers that we have. We deal with inclement weather. We deal with all kinds of ground handling of equipment. Right now, we are being faced with the heat temperatures that will eventually put our agents at a risk of heat exhaustion. Well, due to COVID, they've removed the water coolers that we normally have on the tarmac. So now our employees don't have immediate access to water. They'll have to walk inside the terminal and go and get water while gates are way out on the tarmac. But due to COVID, they said that they couldn't have the water coolers. If we was at the table, maybe you could have spoke to the leaders that represent these employees, and we could have came up with a decision besides just saying, oh, take the water coolers, and it's no, we can't have water coolers.
I work at Bland Landscaping, and our safety issues right now are not bearable. They tried to put plexiglass up in the work truck that we work in, and it's 4 to a work truck, sometimes 5. So they tried spacing us out, but they put 4 of us in a work truck with a plexiglass type barrier that you can actually stick your hand through and just talk to the next person in the front seat just like that. So there's really no safety. I got on my boss about giving me a mask, and it was like he snuck it to me the way he handed it to me. So everybody wouldn't see that he gave me a mask maybe 2-3 weeks into the pandemic. So it's really not safe there. Another issue we're going through is they use the water coolers that we was drinking water out of to wash our hands with, and they added soap to it. So now that everyone think this is over, because pretty much everywhere I've been, I don't see people with masks on at all. And it's like everyone just forgot about COVID-19. And they didn't fill it back up with water. So we're out here in 90, 80 degrees weather, cutting grass, which I haven't heard anyone say that landscapers are essential workers too, because we've been out here working since day one. And I haven't heard that. We haven't got any more masks passed out. And on top of that, someone at the job, 2 people at my job, got it and they hid it from us. No hazard pay. So it's like we're on the front line for a profit. We're exposing our lives for a profit while our boss himself, the owner himself, is at home quarantine calling shots through FaceTime. It's very degrading.
It is disappointing to sit back and watch everything on the news and read the articles and things everywhere, but you rarely see anything being said about daycare providers, especially the in-home daycare providers. When the centers had to close down, they had to turn to the in-home daycare providers. We are essential, but without us, the essential workers could not work. They give us these little checks and all that stuff, which is good. I'm not going to complain about that. But that money is being used for all the supplies that we need. They did give us one face shield, but as a daycare provider, you don't want to wear this around a 2-year-old child, a 1-year-old child. They're terrified of it. We are asking for supplies, which is hard for us to get. They expect us to sanitize our toys, clean and sanitize our toys, which we do, but we have to go out and buy these solutions and equipment and stuff that we need to do these things. And these things are expensive and limited. When you go out to buy 1 bottle of Lysol, you can go out and try to get a case of Lysol. You can only get 1 or 2. And if you're trying to get wipes, 1 or 2. Now, running a center, you need more than 1 or 2, because it almost takes 1 just to spray down the tables and things that they want us to wipe down. But we do it. We do the best that we can do with what we have.
I'm also interacting with customers every day. So they come in and out of our dining room since it's open now, and I have to handle their money all the time also. And most workers can't afford to take the day off, so they have to come and work sick, whether it's COVID or just a cold. So that's also one thing, and it's a public health safety, and it's just not safe for us workers and for everybody else that comes to any restaurant.
So I just wanted to share my story about this because, I just feel like I needed to be heard. Like I feel like people don't fail to realize how important that is working in a chicken plant and convenience stores and stuff like that. They only see healthcare workers, and to me, I feel like it's more out there besides healthcare workers. I get it; they the ones that have to actually deal with the COVID-19 patients and stuff. But still, at the end of the day, I feel like everybody needs to be heard. So I feel like the need to share my story.
So I would like for them to come together and at least give us more money. Hey, we deserve 15 and better now. Since we've been in this COVID, central workers deserve 16, 15, $20, really. We've been out here. We've been working hard. I'm out here. I don't know if I'm sick or not, but I hope, pray to God that I'm not. But hey, this is what it is. So thank y'all and God bless y'all.
So these are things that workers should have a voice. Our workers deserve hazard pay because they're out here facing. We're the ones flying doctors and nurses to their posts to take care of these passengers that's getting COVID. They deserve hazard pay. What we really want is a federal sick leave law because our workers should not be dinged every time they use their sick leave hours, if they even get sick leave hours. Luckily, we bargained in our contract, so they do get sick leave hours, but they get dependability points. So now they're risk losing their jobs for dependability. We don't want workers penalized. I'm sure other workers are getting the same in other industries. We don't want our employees to die. So we need a voice at the table. We need some kind of committee. We need some kind of monitoring. We need to make sure that you are making sure that these companies, whether they're privately owned and just because they're not run by the government, are doing right by their employees.
So the Healthy and Safe Council idea was a wonderful idea. I think that is very powerful for the workers themselves, because the only one would know is the workers at the job, what really goes on at the job.
And we need our voices in our own health and safety. And that's why we need North Carolina to create a council that includes essential workers. If we had a voice in our industry, we would already have paid sick days and hazard pay and other protections that we need to stay safe.
Well, recently, the Supreme Court issued a series of rulings that were cheered by progressive people all around the world. They reaffirmed that it is illegal to discriminate against employees on the basis of their sexual orientation. It struck down, temporarily at least, the attempts to deport tens of thousands of immigrant youth and struck down a Louisiana law that was designed to make it practically impossible for women to get abortions in that state, and of course to set the stage for other states to do the same. Now, the jubilation was even greater because the current makeup of who's on the Supreme Court of the United States. A majority of the members are dyed-in-the-wool right-wingers, and their judicial records are littered with atrocious decisions affecting the lives of oppressed and exploited people. So, needless to say, anytime something comes up before the court that would take away hard-won gains that have been enshrined, or we thought they had been enshrined, it's certainly prudent to hold your breath. Now, the question asks itself here, how is it that such a terrible, horrendous group of people, which is pretty much handpicked because they are a terrible, atrocious, horrendous group of people, actually delivered some decisions here that have a basis in human decency, certainly a decency that many of their past decisions clearly lacked. And in fact, they seem to decide in the opposite direction in similar cases at similar levels of their own careers. So right there, you have to ask yourself, why would they do this? Now, of course, there are some people who revere and support and love the American criminal legal system. And they would say, well, this is, of course, the way it works. That's why it happened the way it is, because the Supreme Court is just a neutral institution that looks at the law, evaluates it fairly, and then issues these decisions. They're guided by the law. So it shouldn't be surprising to you, regardless of the politics of the person, regardless of who appointed them, that something positive would happen. But reality shows us that it's just not how it works. The Supreme Court is actually not neutral, it is supremely political. And the justices aren't just going to randomly depart from the politico-judicial movement that birthed them, in which their entire lives and most of their social lives are completely intertwined, just because they heard a decent argument from a lawyer. Obviously, this is a great narrative for the system itself, because it makes it seem like the U.S. capitalism is completely fair, and the Supreme Court justices are white knights standing against all pressures from outside politics to dispense what's fair and right amongst the broad masses of people. But the real story behind it is that there has to be something else in play. And from our point of view, it really is that something that's really right in front of our faces right now. That's the struggle of the masses of people and the stability of the country. We're right in the middle right now of a widespread revolt that's going on against racism and white supremacy. Everything, almost the very foundations of the country, are being called into question in the context of almost a cultural revolution that's happening with the toppling of these statues and other things being challenged. There's perhaps the worst economic crisis since the Depression of the 1930s, tens of millions of people unemployed, about 15 more million people living in poverty right now than prior to the pandemic. And obviously, when I mentioned the pandemic, we're in the biggest public health crisis, I mean, I don't know if all time is right, certainly of a recent generation, certainly anyone who's alive now. So all these things coming together, the government has also displayed criminal negligence. They've suppressed this protest movement. So all of these things coming together right now, it's a heady brew. And it seems almost impossible to think that John Roberts, who's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and was the swing vote on some of these cases, or at least one of them, I should say, that when he is considering this question, and that quite frankly, when the other judges are considering these questions, that the social impacts do not enter into their minds, to what it would possibly mean to challenge. I mean, these are movements that have brought in tens of millions of people, the LGBTQ movement for justice, the immigrant rights movement that's been raging in a major way since 2006, the struggle of women that is generations long for respect, dignity, and equality. Tens of millions of people have been drawn in the context of that pre-existing movement and our current movement. Those things coming together could be tremendously destabilizing if the credibility of the law was questioned by these people who said, wait a second, maybe the US law does not actually stand for truth, right, and justice. Maybe it does, in fact, stand for oppression and exploitation. And that's when people start to raise different questions. The credibility of the law as crucial to the stability of the country. And historically, this is what we have seen with the way that the court has acted in moments of great upsurges, positive and negative, unfortunately. But the way the politicians want you to view it, which is the way the media reinforces it, which is the team aspect of the Supreme Court. Well, if they put in, ex-president puts in Y Supreme Court justice, then they're going to do the things that you want to see if you like that president, or the things that you don't want to see if you hate that president, or whatever it may be. But as I said, historically, we see this issue of struggle, this issue of the credibility of the law, and this issue of the stability of the country really comes to the forefront. Here's a good example. Chief Justice Earl Warren, who headed up the famous Warren Court, as it's known, and this is in the 50s, 60s, really in the 53 up until 1968. And the Warren Court is responsible for many of the most notable Supreme Court decisions, certainly many of the ones that you learned about in school. Brown v. the Board of Education, Miranda v. Arizona, that's your Miranda rights when you get arrested. Heart of Atlanta Motel Incorporated versus United States, that actually upheld the Civil Rights Act, as well as Gideon v. Wainwright, which was the case that enshrined the right for a lawyer. So you have the right to a lawyer, and if you can't afford one, that's the Gideon case there. And Griswold v. Connecticut, which legalized birth control. So, and honestly, that's not even the whole list. The Warren Court is sort of known as almost the gold standard for liberal jurisprudence in many ways. And of course, its decisions are very much comporting with some of the great mass movements that people rightfully revere in this country. But be that as it may, when you look at Warren, it's hard to really think that when Eisenhower appointed him in 1953, there was any desire for him to do all these things, that he would appoint a Chief Justice who would totally dismantle the legal basis for Jim Crow. I mean, that would have destroyed Republican electoral chances at the ballot box at that time, if that's why, he was on the court, as it were. So, from that perspective, that's one aspect of the sort of team thing that you have to realize. I mean, someone would appoint someone and they would do so much more. But even beyond that, you look at who Warren was as a person, because you could say, okay, Eisenhower didn't appoint him, but maybe it was just a triumph of personal moral character. Unfortunately for him, also not true. Warren's pre-court political history is honestly unbelievable. I mean, it's extremely racist. He was one of the earliest and most enthusiastic supporters of the World War II era internment of Japanese Americans. But even worse than that, he used those national security arguments to manipulate these racist laws in California to bolster where, by the way, he was the attorney general, then the governor, to bolster the stealing of lands from owners of land that were of Japanese descent, and what some have called the biggest land grab, or one of the biggest land grabs in California history, which is certainly saying a lot since the entire state is made up of stolen land. Warren also presided over the state's eugenics program. Yes, California had a eugenics program. It was focused on the forced sterilization of oppressed groups and disabled people at state hospitals. And he was also a noted member of the Native Sons of the Golden West, whose mission was to keep California a white man's paradise. So yes, this is the guy who also wrote the decision in Brown v. Board of Education. Hard to believe that he wrote it just out of the kindness of his heart. So what really changed between the two phases there? The thing that changed was the intersection of the Cold War and the Civil Rights Movement. Now, it's well known and well documented that in the White House and in the halls of Congress, the reason civil rights became so undeniable at the point in history that it did was that the movement exposed that the ruling class's struggle against communism was essentially hollow, because it showed this capitalist hypocrisy in bold relief, because here you are, the United States, allegedly for democracy, with a fascist dictatorship over the southeastern portion of the country. And it seems very clear that Warren and the rest of the court, just like I mentioned about Roberts and the rest of the court earlier, were fully aware of this. It stands to reason that the Warren court's legal vision was very much colored by how the blatant hypocrisy of the U.S. legal code undermined the credibility and the stability of the same legal code, the same country, and ultimately the same struggle for capitalist United States to rule the world and to ultimately defeat the Soviet Union, as it were. And again, as I just said, you can see the parallels for today. The issues at stake, as I mentioned earlier, have drawn in so many people. They've touched on so many crucial issues that to go against them would create a situation where people would start to ask serious questions about the nature of the law. Is it this same neutral instrument? Is it just there, the blind lady justice? Or is it what we've seen it is over time, the instrument of the ruling elites? I mean, who really makes the law, right? He who has the gold makes the rules in this society. So Supreme Court decisions, whether we're talking about the civil rights movement, whether we're talking about our own current moment here, even whether we're talking about the right-wing backlash to some of these progressive movements over time, you see Supreme Court decisions often have a sort of historical tilt to them, where the mood of the country often determines the mood of the court, because the overall issue becomes securing. This is the Supreme Court's role, to secure the law, secure the credibility of the law, i.e. the state, the government that presides over us all and presides over this extremely unequal society. And that ultimately, if you really want to affect the Supreme Court, the way to do it isn't voting, which we're always said, or some having a good president who brings someone in. Ultimately, I think the lesson has to be that if you want to affect Supreme Court decisions on big issues, you have to build a massive movement that can exploit every bit of U.S. hypocrisy on the world stage and leverage that for real change.
Well, as we enter the fourth consecutive weeks of non-stop protests demanding an end to racist police brutality and confronting the totality of the white supremacy underlying the system here in the United States, we also saw this past weekend celebrations and protests in honor of Pride. Of course, this weekend marked the 51st anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising, which is considered really the impetus of the modern day LGBTQ liberation struggle. So we'll watch some sights and sounds of the protests and celebrations that happened this past weekend.
Marching from Hennepin and 4th to Loring Park on Sunday, not thinking twice about a canceled parade.
Black Lives Matter and Pride, because what affects one affects the other.
Black lives, they matter here.
Well, a lot of really powerful images there. Of course, the pride rainbow flag mixed with signs demanding, Black Lives Matter and justice for George and all other victims of police killings. I think it makes total sense that the march is in celebration and for the resistance of the LGBTQ community. We're so easily merged with these ongoing protests demanding an end to racist policing because, of course, these issues are so interconnected. And we know with this legacy of Stonewall, it was a riot that was started because the police were brutalizing Black and brown LGBTQ people, Black trans women in particular, at the Stonewall Inn, of course, in New York City. So again, just really, really beautiful to see people continue on the struggle of this legacy of militancy and in the street struggle for LGBTQ liberation.
No, absolutely. I think worth noting for people, the Stonewall Inn has become so well known around the world. They had to get a $500,000 loan, it was announced this morning, not to close. They have $40,000 a month rent plus everything else that comes with it. And of course, in the context of the pandemic, obviously you can't have the level of business you would have, especially right now around the time of Pride. And it just, to me, is an unbelievable statement. We talk about the interconnectedness of issues, that what is literally one of the most iconic buildings on the planet. This is an icon for LGBTQ people and people who are for justice and equality around the world, that could still be, subject to the gentrifying capitalist market and potentially closed down. And hopefully that will never happen. And of course, the people who are behind the Stonewall Inn and many millions of people around the world, I'm sure will rally to do whatever they can to protect it. But just the fact that you can even have a situation like this where a building like that is not permanently protected and permanently preserved is a slap in the face of the LGBTQ community in this country and around the world, I have to say. it really is quite disgusting. And as much as we're all talking about Stonewall, I think it's important to know that these sorts of that this is happening, and that such an important entity like this could be at risk.
I think that's exactly right, Eugene. That's completely infuriating. Given all the lip service that our liberal politicians here in New York City give to Pride, give to LGBTQ resistance and everything our community has been demanding for decades. It's really, exactly as you said, a slap in the face. And speaking of literal slaps in the face to protesters this weekend, the NYPD and police across the country continuing on their own legacy of beating down LGBTQ people in the streets. We'll turn to some footage of the brutality that we saw at Pride demonstrations over the weekend.
Yeah, well, you can see there a whole range of things. That first image was from Aurora, Colorado. The demonstrations from Elijah McClain. He was a violin player, of course, and so there was a violin concert brutally there. The second one was the Detroit Police Department driving that car. By the way, Governor Kim Reynolds of Iowa, her car hit a protester this weekend, allegedly inadvertently. And then the final one, I believe, was the NYPD, and that was around some of the actions that were taking place there for Pride in New York over the weekend.
That's right. I mean, so disgusting, not surprising. We are seeing the continuing of police repression in the face of a movement demanding an end to police brutality in a time where the entire world is watching the actions of American police, and this is them on their best behavior. But really, as I said, this is them continuing their job, continuing to carry out their role of repressing movements, people's movements for justice, and repressing the most oppressed communities in this country, of course, at large, the Black community. And as we're seeing, of course, this intersection in the Black LGBTQ community, in LGBTQ immigrants, all of this in the poorest communities out here, this is what we're seeing time and time again, and it's really no surprise. But I think this is hopefully a little bit of a wake-up call. I know activists for years on the ground have been calling out the over-policing of Pride parades, the fact that now there are police literally marching in parades, waving the flag, talking about we're out here for queer and trans lives, all of this, you know, this pink washing, also the corporatization and mainstreaming of so many Pride parades around the country, most notably here in New York City, the largest Pride celebration around the world every single year. Incredible police presence and brutality now as we see people merging their celebration of LGBTQ resistance with this fight for Black lives, of course. And I think this is, like I said, a little bit of a reminder of what we need, because with the commercialization of Pride, with how this has turned into some glitter and rainbow celebration in cities across the country, which is beautiful. I mean, we have a right to celebrate, we have a right to dance in the streets and to honor and be proud of our resistance and the legacy of struggle, the giants like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, whose shoulders we stand on. But these very same people, the cops who march alongside us, are the ones who 51 years ago were literally the trigger for the Stonewall uprising, right? Black trans women at the front line of that struggle, defending their people against the police, the NYPD, this long history of just rolling up into gay bars and beating on people. That is why Pride started. So it's really going to show this year that Pride started with a riot. It did not start with a parade, and I think it's so important that we're continuing this militant legacy of struggle, of being in the streets, organizing for our communities, serving our communities, like the legacy of, again, all of these leaders that we hear being name dropped left and right by all of these Democratic and liberal politicians across the board, by the nonprofits that they are in bed with. They love to name drop Marsha and Sylvia and all these other incredible leaders of LGBTQ resistance, but they are the same ones letting the cops come down and brutalize peaceful protesters. So more of the same, but what's really beautiful about it is we are seeing, again, the fourth week of this uprising. People are not going home, and in response to all of this brutality from the police, we're actually seeing more and more people hit the streets. So it's really an incredible testament to people power.
Yeah, absolutely. The struggle continues whether or not the corporate media is showing it.
That's facts.
Well, today, July 1st, was the rumored date that the Israeli government would officially annex the West Bank, making official what has long been clear, that Israel is an apartheid state. Now, there is quite a bit going on with this announcement and when exactly it will be made. But over the past month, we have seen all across Palestine, quite frankly, all around the world, significant protests that have been happening there. Really all across Gaza, all across the West Bank, Germany, here in the United States, really everywhere there has been a significant outpouring of anger around this institutionalization of the current apartheid reality in Israel. To discuss this and some of the broader issues involving the occupation of Palestine, we were able to speak with Manar Muhawish, who is the editor-in-chief of Mint Press News. Well, Manar, thank you so much for joining us here on Breakthrough News.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the first question I wanted to pose to you here is maybe just to set the stage a little bit for people on the issue of annexation. I think a lot of what many people in America may have heard is when and if Israel goes forward with this move, it will be the establishment of apartheid. I think others have said that maybe it's just an extension of the status quo. So, I mean, how do you see this annexation action? Is this a big change for Israel's behavior as it concerns the occupation, or more of an extension of what we have seen over the years?
No, this is absolutely going to be more of what we've seen over the years. And it's important to define the word annexation. It's being thrown around a lot, and we have to define it. Annexation is a term used to describe when a state, and in this case, it's the state of Israel, when it unilaterally seizes another territory within its border. So this is basically, through the definition, it's very clear through this context that Israel is basically stealing land that doesn't belong to it and making it part of its ethnocentric state. So it's just more of the same occupation enabled by Western powers, and this will, without a doubt, create another humanitarian crisis, pushing the West Bank to become the next Gaza.
You know, we've seen obviously some potential delays, at least in this pushing forward, in the context of, huge mass mobilizations in Palestine, many places around the world. I mean, what do you think the role of international forces in opposition to Israeli actions like this are in, helping create the conditions on the ground to promote Palestinian liberation?
Well, this is territorial conquest and occupation as defined by the United Nations Charter, and it's illegal under international law. So we're seeing a mass mobilization within the Palestinian territories of Palestinians marching for the past several months since the Trump-Kushner, Netanyahu-backed supposed, deal of the century was announced. And even the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, declared it illegal and disastrous. And it's because 35% of this Jordan Valley area is going to be taken over by Israel. And it's really important to understand the context of this and why this is causing such outrage. Apart from the expansion of military occupation of over 65,000 Palestinians who live there, this will, we have to understand that the Jordan Valley and the West Bank that's currently being spotted in the so-called deal of the century, this is where major water and fertile land for agriculture stands for Palestinians. It's where they get access to clean water. So it's no question that Israel is trying to steal more Palestinian resources to make it their own. This is the most fertile land in the region that connects to the Jordan Valley, where major water sources are available to Palestinians. And then we have to think about what else they're trying to do. They're trying to encircle the entire West Bank region, putting it in full control of its apartheid regime. If Israel controls the Jordan Valley, it will control the Palestinians' border with Jordan. No airport in the West Bank exists. The only other airport that existed for Palestinians was actually in Gaza, but it was bombed in 2001 under Operation. I forgot what operation it was, but one of the operations that Israel committed against the Gaza Strip. And so Palestinians are now going to be trapped in what's going to be created into another enclave, very similar to what Israel is already doing in Gaza. And we have to think about this from a humanitarian perspective, because if Israel is now taking over all of the Palestinian access to water and agricultural resources, and then also controlling Palestinians' travel and movement, it's going to create another ghetto. And Gaza now is considered the largest open-air prison and ghetto in the world, with over 2 million Palestinians stuck there. We have more people that live in the West Bank, and so this is going to create an even bigger ghetto. It's going to create another humanitarian crisis, and so this is going to create more instability in the region. But this is, of course, very good for people like Trump, and Kushner, and Netanyahu, the Netanyahu government, because what this will allow is for the expansion of illegal Israeli settlements and more funding and profits for the military-industrial complex. For Israel, it's going to continue to expand its occupation and increase its partnership with the security state here in the United States?
Well, I think that's such an important question in terms of the partnership with the United States. And I mean, obviously, or at least I hope it's obvious to people, the impunity that Israeli officials act with is so heavily conditioned by their total support by the United States. But, one issue that has also become, much more in the forefront, given the context of the uprising happening in this country against police brutality, is the issue of the Israeli-U.S. police exchanges. Now, you are there in Minneapolis, and there's been some controversy that has sort of erupted over the fact that the Israeli police have also been filmed using similar sorts of tactics as the tactic, the knee in the neck that was used to assassinate George Floyd. And whether or not there is an exact one-to-one there, which I know is what the controversy has been, it does seem like an important opportunity to maybe just reaffirm, and I'm hoping you could talk a little bit about this close, tight partnership between the occupation forces in Israel and police departments here in the United States.
Well, the United States is the largest superpower in the world, and Israel is one of its client proxy states. It's the reason why the military-industrial complex is profiting and expanding around the world. And so we all know that Israel is exporting its brutality in training police forces around the world, whether it's in Mexico or Colombia. I mean, and even within Saudi Arabia, and helping Saudi Arabia in its occupation and bombing spree in Yemen. And so when we think about the brutality of the Israeli war machine, it would come to many people as a surprise to know that same brutal country that's engaging in apartheid, occupation, and major human rights abuses is actually holding training sessions in Israel to train the American police forces. And I believe it was in 2012 when Minneapolis police departments, and we still don't know if Derek Chauvin, the killer cop that murdered George Floyd in Minneapolis, we still don't know if he was present at this conference. But in 2012, there was a major conference for police training, American police forces from Minneapolis in Israel. And that is where we believe a lot of the brutal tactics that are being used by Minneapolis police forces and the greater U.S. police state system, where they're learning a lot of their brutal tactics. And if we look at the way Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd, he was kneeling on his neck. And I don't know how many images that have been seen from Palestine since the inception of the state of Israel, since 1948, of images of Israeli soldiers and police kneeling on Palestinian, not just adults, but children. I mean, thousands upon thousands of children have lived under the brutal bootstrap of the very brutal Israeli military machine. And so Israel has been using these very inhumane tactics to control, to intimidate, to brutalize Palestinians for so many years. And now we're seeing that taking place here in America, in a country that we supposedly uphold democratic values and human rights. But clearly we're taking lessons from a very brutal occupying, apartheid ethno-state. And so this should really concern every American that is worried about human rights.
Manar Mohawish, the editor-in-chief of Mint Press News, thank you so much for giving us this context and joining us on Breakthrough News.
Thank you very much.
And I think that is going to do it for what we have for this week's show, Monica.
That's right, Eugene. Thanks again to all of our viewers for tuning in to our weekly live stream every Wednesday at 8 p.m. If you haven't already, please be sure to share this video and follow us on social media at BT Newsroom on Twitter and Instagram. You can find us on Facebook at Breakthrough News and on YouTube at Breakthrough News, where you can subscribe to us and get automatic notifications every single time we post a new video. And as well, make sure to check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/Breakthrough News, where you can help keep the important work that we're doing here at Breakthrough continue.
And as always, don't just watch us, join us on Breakthrough.